Hello, everyone. You are live on Heavy Metal Mania with your host, Nathaniel Puente, where we're going to play and talk all things rock and heavy metal. Today's episode is dedicated to a specific album, so it's just going to be a short little episode, or at least short by my standards. And the album we're talking about is one that has not been the best received, especially since the other albums this band has made are just so fantastic, and this is one that in the band's catalog has just been kind of shrugged aside. It's been kind of forgotten, I guess. And what we're talking about here is Rush's debut album, Rush, from 1974. And the thing is about this album is it's the only album in Rush's category, in Rush's catalog, that does not have Neil Peart on drums or lyrics. John Rutsey was the original drummer of Rush, and he handled the drum kit on this album. And there's a lot to be said about this album because a lot of people do like it. I mean, there's always support for the tracks every now and then, but I do see a lot of people hating on this album, saying some negative things about this album. And we're here to address all of that, see where I stand on it, and hopefully that everyone can form their own opinion on Rush's debut album. So before we get into the actual album itself, a little context, of course. So Rush, before they had any albums, they were just a band, another band from Canada. They had a tough time proving their self-worth. They had a tough time getting record labels to believe that they were serious, that they were a good band. Because if you've watched the documentary Behind the Lighted Stage, they go way in depth about all of this at the very early part of Rush's career. But although I'll say that they don't go too much in depth on it, they kind of skip over when Rush actually started around 1968 with a man named, gosh, I forget his name. His last name's Jones, but he was the original. Jeff Jones, I think is his name. He was he was actually the bassist and vocalist of Rush, who's not Geddy Lee, because Geddy Lee obviously has been on every Rush album, along with guitarist Alex Lifeson. But Rush didn't really start out that way, but they don't really talk about that in the documentary. But they do talk about some of the early days, and when Geddy first got in the band, and when it was Geddy, Alex, and John Rutsey in the band. And it was tough for them in the early 70s to, get any respect around Canada because there were no record labels up there at the time. Everything was in America, and it was really tough for Canadian bands to prove their worth to the American labels. And finally, the band was able to get an album deal together. They did it with a self-managed record company, which was known as Moon Records. And the album was released only in Canada. Only 3,500 copies of the original were pressed and sent out to Canada. But a couple of them made their way across the border, and one of those was picked up by a DJ for Cleveland's WMMS, and it was a woman by the name of Donna Halper. And that name is going to be familiar to hardcore Rush fans because Donna Halper is seen as the DJ who kind of made Rush's career, because she played Working Man on the Cleveland radio station, and that basically from there Rush broke out. They basically made it big in America right after that moment, after Halper played Working Man, because a lot of people, when they first heard the song, they thought it was a new Led Zeppelin song actually. And so, and that's the thing you're going to see on this album, on Rush's debut album, that there's a lot of inspiration here from Led Zeppelin, a lot of it from Cream, and it definitely shows on this record. And why do people not like this album? Well, I can definitely see why, if you're a huge Rush fan, that you would stay away from this album, because these songs are very different from anything Rush did later on in their career. Not too different, but obviously when it's a band who made songs like Tom Sawyer, Cygnus X1, I don't know, Subdivisions or something like that, it's not it's not that those songs aren't very straight ahead rock. They aren't very hard rock songs. They're really more on the progressive rock side, obviously. And this album has almost none of that. There's some hints of it here and there on songs like Before and After or Here Again, but definitely most of the album is void from that label of prog rock. And I think the thing that inspired me most to make this podcast is that a while back, a couple of weeks ago, let me see if I can get an exact date. Not right now, don't know, but it was a couple weeks ago. The website Ultimate Classic Rock actually published an article ranking every single Rush song, and the last two were In the Mood and Need Some Love. And those songs, two of my favorite songs on this album. So I'm not gonna hate on the person who made that list, because I make top 10 lists. I make opinion lists all the time, so I obviously know that everything's subjective, and everyone who makes these lists, they're putting as much effort as they can into them, unless it's like Watch Mojo or something. But so I'm not gonna hate on the person who did this, but it definitely does bring up a good point that a lot of people do not find this album so amazingly. A lot of people really think this is their worst album. And to the people who think that, I'll ask them, have you ever heard Test for Echo, Roll the Bones, or Feedback? I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for those three opinions right there, but those are probably my my least favorite three Rush albums right off the bat. But Rush, the debut album, Rush, from 1974, I wouldn't call it one of my favorite albums. There's probably at least 11 or 12 Rush albums I'd put ahead of it, but it's definitely not the worst. It's far from the worst. So we're going to go track by track and see what I think of every song, and maybe we can see what you think of the songs too. Every song on this album was written by Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson, which definitely changed once we get to even their second album, Fly By Night, because when drummer Neil Peart came in, he duoed as not only as a drummer, but as a percussionist. No, I'm kidding. He was a drummer, percussionist, and the lyricist. He took the role as the main lyricist, and it definitely helped Rush grow to be one of the biggest prog rock bands on the planet. But on this album, they didn't have Neil Peart there to be writing the lyrics, so Geddy and Alex kind of did it on their own. Most of the songs, I've never really looked too much into the composition of the songs and who wrote them and when they were written, because you imagine when most bands are working on their first album, a lot of the songs have already been written when the bands were gigging and didn't have any money, which not that Rush had much money even after this album, but when they were in their darkest days and their hardest times of being a band, the make it or break it years, And I do know that there was a song that they released as a single before this album came out. It was a cover of Buddy Holly's song Not Fade Away, which I've always thought was a good song, and it's kind of a shame that they didn't leave it on the album. Obviously, it's a cover, so it's better to have a full, all original compositions rather than put a cover on your first album, so I respect that. Rush would turn their head on that because in 2007, they made Feedback, which is completely full of covers. But the B-side to Not Fade Away was a song called You Can't Fight It, and You Can't Fight It is a pretty cool song. And they were actually going to include You Can't Fight It on the album, but they decided not to, which I think was a bad idea because it's a good song. And I think it could have fit. The album is only 39 minutes, so definitely maybe room for another 3-minute song on there. And that's another thing about this album is that there's only one song over there's 3 songs over 5 minutes, but there's only one song over 6 minutes, and that's of course Working Man, the final song on the album, at 7 minutes. And for Rush, that's very different because a lot of their songs are over 10 minutes, right? So seeing that, this album is definitely different in their category. So let's start it off. What's the first song in the album? What's technically the first song on the first, well, not technically, what is the first song on the first Rush album? The first song of the first Rush album is known as Finding My Way. And Finding My Way starts out with a really cool opening riff from Alex Lifeson, and I've always liked that. And after you hear that riff for about 5 or 6 times, probably more, you hear Geddy scream his lungs off right there, and you know that you're in for a hard charge and hard rockin' album, and that's exactly what you get. Finding My Way has always been one of my favorite songs on the album. Definitely top 3, maybe even my second favorite song in the album. So I'd give this one I'd give it 4 stars out of 5. The second song on the album is the one that was called the second worst Rush song by Ultimate Classic Rock. It Needs Some Love. And the lyrics to this one have always kind of been a little immature, I guess. You know, it's just seems like a song that a band this age would write. And I mean, what year was this released? All these guys were about 22 around the time this album dropped. So, you know, it's just, the lyrics are kind of cheesy, but I think it's kind of what you'd expect from a Geddy and Alex composition. That being said, it's a cool song. I've always liked this one, even when I was first getting into Rush and I was first liking all the crazy, I was liking the Camera Eye and Xanadu and songs like that. I still found a soft spot for Need Some Love, and I still have it. So 4 to 5 for me. The third song on the album is Take a Friend, and Take a Friend is that one song on the album, one of the 2 or 3 songs in this album that show the kind of prog side that Rush would evolve into. It starts off pretty slow with a build up that builds towards a faster pace that this song eventually hits. And the lyrics are kind of a little lame, but I've always liked the chorus. The chorus has always been pretty cool to me. And so this one is not one of my favorite Rush songs. And I think the one thing that kills it for me is that at the end of the chorus, there we go. I think we heard it. Hopefully you heard it on the mic. When Geddy says "feels so good," it goes into this like echo kind of thing that happens, and I've just always thought that was so cringy. I've never liked that part, and that is what makes Take a Friend one of my least favorite songs on this album. The next song on the album, the last track on side 1, is Here Again, and this is another one that probably shows the most proggy of Rush's eventual work. And this is Here Again. It's really slow in the beginning. We'll skip ahead. Geddy sings in a very low, slow voice, which is something that he's not really known for being good at. Most of his stuff is singing aggressive and high and feeling like it's just popping your brain out when you're thinking about it, and that's what his bread and butter is. But this one's kind of more slower, and it doesn't really work with the music, I don't think, his voice on this album, but he was still kind of finding his way, I guess, on this record, you know. And obviously, if it wasn't for this record, we wouldn't have the great songs that we have today from Rush, the great ones that we can always go back and look at. So you got to appreciate songs like this where they were trying different things, and they eventually found it. But Here Again, it definitely I don't think it works. I'd give this one 2 stars, I think. Which I don't think I rate Take a Friend, but I'd give that one about 1.5 stars. The first song on side 2 and the 5th song on the album is What You're Doing. And What You're Doing is another one with some questionably poor lyrics, I think. But it's an alright song. I've never had too hard of an opinion on this one. It's like in the middle there. If it comes on, I won't skip it most of the time, but it's never gonna be one that I hear it and I turn the volume up and I'm like, yes, what you're doing. I've been waiting for this all day. No, I've never waited for this one, but it's there, and it's one that you can like fool your friends if you know this song and be like, hey, you know, you might know, I don't know, I don't know, it's an obscure Rush song. You might like losing it, but I like what you're doing, you know, I mean, I don't know. My attempt at a joke. The next song on this album is In the Mood, which is the only one that is a solo composition from Geddy Lee. And this is one of those 2 songs that was released as a single from the album. Why? I don't know. But In the Mood is a cool song to me. This has always been one of my top 3 songs on the album, which was voted as by Ultimate Classic Rock as the worst song in Rush's entire catalog, which I definitely do not agree with. This has always been one of my favorites, you know. This definitely is their attempt, just like Need Some Love, at kind of like a perverted love song. And obviously that's never been Rush's forte, and it wasn't back then when they were younger either, so it's a little, the lyrics are a little nasty too. Nasty, not in a nasty in a bad way, like they're not good, but I've always really liked the music that goes along with it. I've always liked this song, one of my favorites. 4 stars. Why not? Before and After is the 7th song on the album, and it's the penultimate song. And it's another one that shows their kind of slower proggy side, and it starts off very slow. I know the beginning of this song. I know that I'm gonna go check it right now. I think on the Ultimate Classic Rock review, they definitely like just blasted this this early part of the song where it's just really slow. No, it's not this one that they say it, but there's one of the songs, I think it might be Here Again, where they just completely like say you fall asleep after the 2-minute intro or something like that. And it's kind of true. You know what? I'm stupid. I said that this song only had one song over 7 minutes. It actually has 2. Here Again is 7 minutes and 30 seconds. And I think that one is probably kind of a boring Rush song. But like I said earlier, it's their attempt at trying to do stuff like that we'd see later on. So you gotta admire the enthusiasm, and you definitely appreciate it. At least I do. I mean, I don't know about other people. If you don't like this album, I mean, I don't think anybody's gonna get too mad at you. Whereas if you like hate it on A Farewell to Kings or something. But the thing is, like you can hate on any album, even if it's like Roll the Bones, and people are gonna blast you like, hey, how can you hate that album? That's such a majesty. And I mean, Roll the Bones is okay. It's not terrible, but it's definitely like it's not that great. Like, I'm never gonna care about half of the songs in that album. I don't even care about probably any of the songs, but I mean, there's a couple good ones, but we're not talking about Roll the Bones right now. My point was that you can hate on every album, any album you want, and people are going to blast you for it. So, you know what? If you don't really like an album, don't let anyone's opinion change your mind. If you hate it, go ahead and hate it. If you love it, go ahead and love it. Just because you love it doesn't mean other people have to, you know? And the lyrics finally kicking on Before and After, 2.5 minutes into the song. So I'm wondering why this one isn't the one blasted for having a useless intro, and I just skipped through the song. So, you know what? Screw Before and After. We're talking about Working Man. And this is the song that they performed way back from 74 all the way to their last tours. I don't know if they played it on every tour, but they definitely played it for the majority of their career, and it deserved it. It survived so much, so many different random Rush eras, from their hard rock early roots to the 70s prog rock science fiction nonsense to the 80s when they were all keyboards and whatever they were in the 80s, to the 90s of trying to mix hard rock with prog rock or whatever they were doing, to today. Well, not today because they're retired, I guess, but Working Man has just solidified and kind of been a microcosm for Rush as a whole. And it's a beautiful song. It's an awesome song. This is the only song on this album that I think you'll ever meet someone who says that it's their favorite. And I've met quite a bit of people who say this is their favorite Rush album. And why not? A lot of people feel that this one describes them. And, you know, if you think so, more power to you. You know, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. It's a good song, even from the first time I ever heard it. And I was like 14. I thought, like, wow, that's cool. There's some cool lyrics. The music is beautiful. And it ends off would I call it a solid album? Sure, why not? It ends off a solid album. So that's Rush by Rush. One thing I should note before we close it, the original album cover, it was supposed to be red. The Rush logo was supposed to be red, which they fixed in later releases. But obviously, in every rock band's career, there's always one album that they screw up horribly, and this one, they made the logo pink when Rush's first album dropped, kind of like Anthrax's first album, right? Anthrax? Was that yeah, it was Anthrax that happened to. Kind of like Anthrax's album. And Rush, the same thing happened to them. Their first album was pink, and the copy I own, the vinyl I own, they fixed it and it's red. But personally, I like the pink one more, just because that kind of mistake just kind of goes with the album, you know. It kind of fits that that kind of a mistake would happen on an album like this. So that's Rush by Rush. It was released in 1974. That's 44 years ago. That's crazy. It's a lot older than I am, but I still think it's crazy, you know? So what do I think of the album? I think it's a decent album. I think it's a misunderstood album, but I think it's a rightfully persecuted album. I think if you are solely into Rush's prog stuff, you're probably not going to love this album, with the exception of Working Man, like everybody else. But if you do like hard rock stuff, plus everything else Rush has done, I think you can find at least 2 or 3 songs on here that you really enjoy. And for me, I would say there's about, of the 8 songs on the album, I think 1, 2, 3, I think 5 of them I can honestly say like are really cool to me. Only about 2 of them would be in my top like 50 Rush songs. Try to take a guess at which 2 are. But yeah. So there's Rush by Rush. Obviously after this album, everything was uphill from here, unless you count Caress of Steel. They got Neil Peart on Fly By Night, and they flew to the top, you know, with Neil Peart on the drums, as he became one of the most revered and well-respected hard rock drummers of all time. And it's well deserved, because he is the best hard rock drummer of all time, progressive rock drummer of all time, whatever you want to call him, best drummer of all time. I don't know enough about music as a whole that's not rock music to make that opinion, but I'm gonna call Neil Peart my favorite drummer, favorite percussionist. And so yeah, after that, Fly By Night, and you have 2112, of course, which just skyrocketed them. Farewell to Kings, Hemispheres, and you name it. Everything after that, just hit after hit after hit of albums, you know. But it all started here, and everyone starts somewhere, and it definitely started with Rush, and it's an album that splits a lot of Rush fans as to whether or not they like it. And I think more than anything else, because with Test for Echo, which is one of my least favorite Rush albums, there's a lot more people on the opinion of we just don't care. And I think that's even how I am with Test for Echo. I just don't care about it. Whereas with this first album, because, I mean, it's in an era of Rush where, like, a lot of people with any band they obsess over, like, the early days is kind of like something you have to care about, right? And obviously they released an album. They just dropped an album out of nowhere in 1974. And, you know, a lot of people have different opinions on it. And, yeah. So what's your opinion on Rush's Rush? Leave a comment or whatever. So, this is Nathaniel Puente on Heavy Metal Mania, signing out. Have a Rush day, I guess. I don't know. Go listen to a better album.